by singing. Now I'd like to introduce the first speaker of the day. And in most societies, there's a great concern about the conditions for people with intellectual disabilities. But the conditions for living, and maybe especially the rights to be respected for the person who you are, is much more difficult. The speaker now has used a lot of time concerning just about this. So let's welcome Dr. Karl Ellingsen from Norway.
Thank you. Okay, once again, good morning, and thanks to the committee for inviting me here today. I am myself a social educator, so it's very nice to be here together with so many others. I have worked as social educators for many years in human services for persons with intellectual disabilities in many positions and in what we call central institutions, seen them closing down, and I also participated in different kinds of ideologies, seen them come, and perhaps even seen some gone. In the 80s, we had normalization. In the 90s, we worked a lot on supported employment. And in the new decade, self-determination came very strong to Norway. I have worked as an associated professor at the University College in South Trøndelag, and teaching and training students to become social educators. So I have seen many sides of this development. I am today director of National Institute on Intellectual Disabilities in Norway. The title of my presentation today is Self-Determination for Persons with Intellectual Disabilities. There is a problem with picking one topic and trying to speak clearly about it. That is the tendency of limiting and distinguishing what is interrelated phenomenon. And by that, reducing them. I think we risk decreasing self-determination if we conceal its interrelation with participation, cooperation, relations, user involvements, democracy, inclusion, social work, human services, and human rights. Since we are in Scandinavia, in Denmark, I like to mention that in the early 1960s, both Bank Mikkelsen from Denmark and Nidria from Sweden were active in changing human services for persons with intellectual disability. If the society change, we like to think that is for the better. Bank Mikkelsen was often quoted for saying, "In Denmark, even cattle lives under better conditions than persons with intellectual disability does here," referring to living conditions in American state institutions. Much has changed since then, but we have to ask ourselves, has it changed in a way that people are equal? In 1969, Nidria said that the right of self-determination do not exist if it's not respected. Do we respect that right today, or are we witnessing the emperor's new clothing? I hope to take a little journey together with you, and we'll start to show some of the PowerPoints. There are some who have tried to figure out what the roots are for self-determination. And legal rights, obviously, is very important. And also human rights, the declaration, as I already have mentioned, normalization has also been very important. Social activism, self-advocacy organizations, participation, power and control, and also, as we shall see later, the term causal agents. I like to use a little time looking at some of the legal backgrounds. And the first thing I think is very important to be aware of is that legal rights involves values. Some have said that the laws are the most authoritative way to express values. And violation against the legal rights undermine the legal protection and challenge the rights to make one's own decisions. Which in turn challenge your right to individual developmental and developing individual identity. Some are more affected by such violations, and people with intellectual disabilities certainly are among those people. When we talk about legal protection, it's very important to be aware of that access to resources is very fundamental to this question. And I think around the world we have to speak up about this, because it's very often that people with intellectual disabilities don't have access to all kinds of resources, and some are also in a situation with little access at all. And legal protection and legal requirements guarantee good and correct decisions. To make a decision about services will always have to be founded in the law and legal rights. So there are some thinking about what guarantees legal rights, and among other things is legality, and also the executive work that a lot of social educators do on a daily basis are very important, and is deciding what kind of services people get. Okay, then we have the Declaration of Human Rights, and I think it's also very important to be aware of the saying that we are the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of human family. That, of course, then includes everyone, no matter. And it's the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Everyone knows these articles, I think. The first one, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And I think it's very basic and a very important article to be aware of in everyday work. And then we have also the UN's Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and again we will see freedom to make one's own choice and to participate. Participation has been a topic for many years, and as we shall see on the next slides, a lady called Arstein has written about this, and she says that participation without redistribution of power is an empty and frustrating process for the powerless. And I think that is also a very, very important message. She has a ladder of how a society allows people participation. And she says that therapy and manipulation is non-participation. And on the top of the ladder you find citizens' control, delegated power, and that is citizens' power as she sees it. And this is back in 1969. I think much of it still is solid. she also adds, and I think this is for social educators and others, group therapy must as citizen participation should be on the lowest rung, that is on the bottom of the ladder, because it is both dishonest and arrogant. And I thought that was a good reminder. Wolfensberger is another person who has been very involved in the normalization principles. And he says something about power. A lot of people talk about power when talking about self-determination. And he says that the power ideology appears to claim that having or not having power not only determine how one will be treated, but also whether one will get the good things of life. Okay? A little cynic version. Are people more likely to get the good things of life by occupying social roles that are valued by others, or by the exercise of power, autonomy, and self-determination in and over their lives, and of power over or vis-a-vis other people? That is his question. And for those who knows Wolfensberger's principles, the answer is rather clear. He talks about valued roles, social roles. So his thinking is that perhaps the power thinking is a trap, and we shall see some more of that. He has written an article in 2000 where, and it's called Social Role Valorization and or versus Empowerment. If the ideal of choice and self-determination in all things were taken at full face value and to its extreme, it would be de facto it would de facto result in what has come to be called dumping. That is a very common word nowadays. Label market has brought that term up. That is, in handicapped people not only being set into society free from all constraints or supervision, but also without the support that they do need to live safely and decently. So Wolfensberger kind of warning us against this thinking. He is known to be a person who thinks very highly of science and empirical science. And so here he has something about empirism and or religion. Some people will embrace empowerment and self-determination position as a religion. And what they want is power and not valuation and acceptance. Thus, one would not be dealing with an empirical controversy over what does and does not work, but with a controversy at the level of fundamental values and religion beliefs. Strong words from Wolfensberger. I have then tried to figure out, is it true, as Wolfensberger says, that the idea of self-determination is a belief, is a religion, or do we find any evidence of otherwise? Is there done any empirical studies? I have earlier said that there are very little science done on self-determination for persons with intellectual disability. And I think one of the reasons is that many or very few persons with intellectual disability actually do practices the right to determine for themselves. But however, there are some very interesting science, especially done by Wiemeyer and colleagues. And I have also mentioned that much of this science is done in America. There are recently some studies from other countries as well, but Wolfensberger and his colleagues are very dominantly into this field. In 1996, he conducted a series of structured interviews with more than 400 individuals with intellectual disability. And what he wanted to do was to examine if there are some essential characteristics involved in self-determination. behavior. What he then used was self-reporting measures of self-determination. Later we will see that he actually developed a scale, a system that later have been used for finding out whether people do practice self-determination or not. So what they found was that there are actually 4 dominant characteristics of self-determination. And the first one is behavioral autonomy. That is from dependency of others for care and guidance to self-care and self-direction. I hope you understand the meaning of it. So it's very important to realize that we all kind of move from being very dependent of others to being able to take care of ourselves. The other one, and is one that is even perhaps more important, is self-regulation behavior. And that is a complex response systems enabling individuals to examine their environments and their repertoire of responses. That is, how do I act? How does it work? And if it doesn't work, and if it works in a way that I'm not very pleased of, how do I change it? And I think this one is more important than we often think of. When we go to a meeting, we tend to bring something with us that brings us confidence. If we are in a position where we are a little bit frightened, it's nice to have somebody you know to look at, or perhaps bring something in your pocket that makes you feel safe, to have a table in front of you so that people don't attack you, all these things. And people with intellectual disabilities often are in situations where they don't know what is going to happen. They have felt very unsafe, and some people have something that they are very attached to, like, for instance, a doll or whatever it should be. And based on the principle of normalization, you might end up thinking that a lady at the age of 40 going downtown shouldn't bring a doll with her. That would make her look like a child. But what you then might end up doing is taking away from the lady what is for her self-regulating opportunity. So having to leave the doll, you take away the possibility for being a person who self-regulate in situation of fear or danger. And that also very easily ends up in a person who have to behave in ways that bring her or him out of the situation. And that always or very often ends up in conflicts that are being looked upon as challenging behavior or bring problems for the person. So we have to look very close into this one. And there are 2 more, but I'm jumping further because what they found was they divided the group, the 400 people, into 2 groups. And they also had questions about the degree of self-determination. And those who was on the low range of the scale was in one group, up to the middle, and then those on the high grade and to the middle was in the other group, divided into 2 groups. And what they found was there was a very close relation to who scored in the high and low range, and to 2 of the essential characteristics out of the 4. And it was the 2 that I used time on explaining, the one that had to do with behavioral autonomy and the one about self-regulation. So if a person are hindered in being self-regulating, that will also jeopardize the person's opportunity to be self-dependent. And what they also found was that the degree of self-determination also had effect on how they scored on measures about quality of life. So high score of self-determination also ended up in high score on quality of life. Very important to be aware of. They also did some later studies, and this goes back in 2003. Again, 301 persons, and he wanted to now find out if the level of IQ, or that is very common in America and also in other countries. And he had 149 persons with an intellectual disability scoring from 75 to 56 at the scale. And then he had 93 persons with IQ less than 55. And then also there was 59 persons with a developmental disability. They used what has become to be the ARC's self-determination scale. That is based on the first work that I showed you that he had been doing on the 500 individuals that have been asked to score. And what they now found was that first of all, this scale had constructibility and internal consistency. So just to make sure that everybody understands that what Wolfensberger said, that it's not based on evidence, empirical evidence, but on belief. This is a scale that has been tested and showed what is necessary to be used for statistics analysis. And they found, consistently with their earlier research, that people with more severe intellectual disabilities were less self-determining. So, well, that's perhaps a sad story, but it's not so strange either. However, and that is very important, also consistent with their earlier findings, that the correlation between IQ and self-determination scores was significant but relatively low. And even more important, it had little practical significance. So coming to the work that you do as a social educator, it had very little practical meaning. There are some Norwegian studies as well showing some of the same things. I'm not going to go through all of it, but what they found in this study, it was done by Tøssebro and Lundeby, and it shows that at the time of closing down the institutions in Norway, which happened between 1991 and up till 1995, most of it was done in 1991, they found that there was decrease of self-determination as institutions were closed down. But it flattened out after the closure of the institutions. And here are what they found. And they have 3 times data collection. It was in 1989, 1994, and 2001. And when we look at the data from 89 and 94, the question about who decides who is employed, in 89 they didn't have any figures, but in 1994 only 1% take part in the decision. So that is not very high. And deciding who to live with, you could also ask, do you have to live with somebody? But obviously you have to. So deciding who to live with, in 89 only 5% decided who to live with, but in 94 16% was taking part in that decision. So that is an improvement. Control over income. Before I'll take the figures, maybe we should check in the audience who controls their own income. And here you see figures saying that in 89 only 34% could decide over their own income, but in 94 54%, so that is almost double as many. So that is an improvement. And when it comes to diet and meals, in 89, 44% decided, and in 94, 66% decided. And now a lot of cynical persons will say, well, that's why so many people have a bad diet and gain weights and having weight problems. So, of course, there is always a risk that people will see things from different sides. And choice of clothes, you see that as much as 77% in 94. Well, this is very interesting figures, but is it actually about self-determination? Are these good questions to define whether a person has or has not self-determination? We will come back to it. I think that when a scientist decide what questions to ask and what divide a person from belonging to a group that has self-determination to a group that does not have self-determination, then the researcher make decisions based on his or her understanding of it, and not based on the person with intellectual disabilities understanding of it. And in the end of my presentation, I will come back to how people with intellectual disability looks at it.
Staff contact the institutions by telephone. What does Nueva want? Whose interest is served by the whole process? Appointments are made. Then, in each institution, the main task is to collect information directly from the users.
Dürfen Sie Ihr Zimmer zusperren?
Das ist Ihr Zimmer mit Möbeln und so. Das ist Ihre Türe mit dem Schlüssel. Dürfen Sie Ihr Zimmer zusperren?
Wenn ich Sie richtig verstanden habe, haben Sie ja gesagt. Dann kreuze ich jetzt.
Having filled in detailed questionnaires and checklists, which are rendered all the clearer through depiction in graphical form too, the residents are then personally interviewed regarding their individual situation in terms of accommodation. All of this is of course conducted under guaranteed conditions of confidentiality.
So this is an example of persons with intellectual disability taking control over it and are also the one that carry out the interviews. It's a EU project run by the company Atempo. Atempo means in your own speed, and has 4 countries altogether in that project. And they have started out with, I think it was 10,000 or 1,000 different kinds of questions, and they broke them down into categories, and I think they have ended up with about 80 questions that are being asked through this questionnaire. So this is a development that many people never thought would be possible. And a researcher has for a long time asked, can we actually ask questions to persons with intellectual disability? Is it reliable, or should we ask others? So here the control is turned quite the opposite way. Well, there are many words that can be used instead of self-determination. I'm just going to jump around here. If we wish to participate in decision, what is it really that we want? Is it to be the one that decides, the one that controls the process, to fulfill our objectives? What is it actually that we want? I think that is very important. Is it only to be present? So I know that somebody would say, well, yes, to me it's very important to be present, because then at least I know what people are talking about. And I think that's a fair demand to be allowed to be present, and that hasn't always been the case.
We have goals. We have dreams. We want to make our lives in this world as well as anyone else. We want to be able to walk out our door and walk down the street and ride in the car, yes, ride in the car that, you know, we pick out. Myself, they might call my car a luxury car because I want a Mercedes. And believe it or not, I'm going to get that Mercedes one of these days. So that's going to be one of my goals. Also, another goal is all my life I've watched the government work on television and different things like that. But one day I'm going to be a senator for my state of New York. And after that, I want to be president. I guess a lot of people would say, why would you want to be president? But my theory is, in order to make change, you have to be that change. You have to be the one to make a difference. Because why we're all here is because we feel that we can contribute and that we can add something to the world to make it a better place. And if we don't, there's the door, and you know what to do.
So this is from the first international conference on self-determination in Seattle in 2000. I think the important lesson that Chester Finn tells us is to make a change, and that is actually what we want, isn't it? You have to be that change. And I think Chester Finn is correct. I think people with intellectual disabilities actually have to be that change. They have to show us how to change things, and he's a good representative. Well, what is self-determination? It's defined to be something that refers to the attitudes and abilities. So it says that to act as the primary causal agent in one's life and to make choices regarding one's quality of life free from undue external influence or interference. And a lot of people don't perhaps have the knowledge or the experiences that we think are required, or perhaps can't always act in ways that make the choice come real. And here Weimar says that being self-determined is not a function of how much you can do yourself behaviorally, but instead is a function of how much you can make of or cause things to happen in your life. So I know that a lot of people with intellectual disabilities aren't able to do things themselves, but have people supporting them and knows ways to make things happen. I also would like to add that it's also very important to be aware of that it's the things that are important in one's life that really is the things that matter. So if we want to say that, okay, if you should be self-determining, then you have to be able to decide where to live, how to pay your bills and all these things. But of course we have to take into consideration that a person who has no experiences with that doesn't think of it as important, and therefore it's not very important for the person to make that decision. And if we push those kinds of decisions over to the person, then we start using self-determination in a negatively way, and I think that also happens. We have had a new law in Norway in 1999, sorry, about coercion. And some said that if the person, him or herself, consented in the use of coercion, then the person should be allowed to do so. And a lot of us others say that, well, that's a poor way to start using your right to self-determination, to use it to allow others to use coercion against you. So there is always someone who will have a debate on that. Also, very fundamentally, as we saw, that self-determination and quality life, in a way, are very linked together. There is another word that is very often used in Norway instead of self-determination, and that is user involvement. And that means that's more linked to the democratic principles like representation on board, advisory bodies and committees. So it's not that you are speaking for yourself, but you are a member of a group and are a delegate on behalf of others. And user involvement has two objectives. The first one is to get information and to be heard, and the other one is to contribute with information to those who make the decisions. And that is something different from self-determination. And I think it's very important to have those two from each other to make sure that you distinguish them. By using the term user involvement instead of self-determination, there is a chance that the existing rights and sovereignty of each individual are reduced to involvement. And I think sometimes what a person wants is to be involved. Well, that's fine, but that's not self-determination. And similarly, the significance of user involvement in democratic processes can be reduced if we conclude that user involvement is protected through individual involvement in cases that affect us. I think it's very wise to separate them and by that strengthen both of them. Okay. There is somebody who has written a rather good question. It's written by Kristiansen, Söder and Tøssebro, and these are people from the Nordic countries. And they says, no one doubts that greater personal autonomy, self-determination, and having more choices and control over one's life is important. But it's also essential to remember that most of us have also received support and assistance in learning how to make choices, what to consider, and have some sort of way that we have learned to weigh alternatives and possible consequences. Persons who have been controlled by others up through adult life and been excluded from ordinary life experiences often simply do not know how to make decisions. Well, that is very true. A lot of people who have lived in large institutions are denied the possibility of making choice. They don't know how to do it. And therefore, it seems to be very unfair from one day to the other, say, well, you have self-determination, go and do what you want. And that is what they are actually warning about. But at the same time, it will be wrong to say, since we have had control up till today, let's keep the control. So you have to be part in that change. This is a figure. I don't have actually time to go through it all, but I think it's very important, as Maslow has said, that you have to look into the levels. And on the bottom level, you find what is called basic needs. And on the top, you will have what is growth. That is the two dimension that has actually been possible to prove scientifically that exists. And if we divide this figure into the two things that has to do with basic needs and what has to do with the possibility to grow, then to choose for a person to do things that brings growth, it wouldn't be something that you necessarily need to use force or coercion to make happen. But sometimes you could perhaps consider using force or coercion or think that the person shouldn't be allowed to decide for himself if the person are able to take care of him or herself and brings up positions where you want to take control over the person's life. I think it's very wise to at least start dividing it, because I think we take control in others' life, whether it is to help the person with care, or if it is to make sure that the person do also things that can bring growth for the person. That is, things that we think is important for the person. Power is also very important in this debate, and I think the third one is very important, and that is consciousness controlling power. That is when you're hindering person's ideas, requests, and thoughts to come on the board and being taken into consideration at all. And there is also some who has looked in what happens when we don't act equally against each other, but are more orientated against power over others. And a lady called Skau has made this figure, and what she says is that on the right lower quarter you will see the dark room where people are using hidden force, and this is when people start taking control over others and want them to do things that they don't want to do themselves. For instance, go to the day center when they don't really want to go and then push them out into the bus or whatever they do. Then you are actually using force against the person, against what the person decide for himself. And I think it's very important to have this debate on coercion because it happens very often in Norway, and I'm sure it happens in other countries as well. And in Norway, it shows that coercion are used because of schedules that are made up for the day plans, as it's called, and the staff demanding things from persons with intellectual disabilities. And research shows that as much as 35% of all cases comes from that. And our studies in Norway shows that as much as 20% of people in the municipality of Trondheim was or experienced use of coercion, and in a national study it shows 10%. So perhaps the figures that we know, and not the hidden data, but those that we know, shows that somewhere between 10 or 20% of all persons in Norway who have an intellectual disability and receive support will also receive force and coercion along their services. And that is a situation where people deny the person the right to decide for themselves. And I think in that respect, power, coercion, self-determination are very close, linked to each other, and it's very difficult not to talk about the one talking about the other. Yeah. And why do parents and why do staff want to hinder people with intellectual disability to make choices for themselves? What is the problem? I think some of the answer has shown us that it has to do with communication and cross-communication, actually. When we believe that we are talking about the same issue as other or a situation like that, which is not true, then it very easily comes to situation that we talk across each other. And there are 6 words that I think is very important here. That is safety, security, and control. And danger, risk, and freedom. These are 6 very important words that makes things very difficult when it comes to self-determination. And they are linked to each other in ways, but having control, what is it really actually that we are looking for? What is control? Is control avoiding risks? Is it feeling? Is it control over your fears for what you perceive as dangerous? What is control? And the same you could ask about risks. They can, as I said, be categorized. And if you do so, then you will categorize them like safety and danger, security, risk, freedom, and control. Let's put it the other way. if you think of them as very separated from each other, then that's one way to look at it. They don't have anything to do with each other. And if you do so, then it allows you to talk about these three dimensions separately. Then you don't have to mix them. So what is safety? Safety is a feeling. What is security? It's something that you can measure. So by not using safety but security, then you make it possible to talk differently about it. If a mother say, I would like to be safe knowing that nothing is happening to my daughter, that is something else than saying, I would have guarantees, I would know the risk factors. I would like you to make statements about how secure it is. That is something different. It's very difficult to give safety, but it's more easy to give figures about risk factors. So there is a good reason to separate it. If you don't separate it, if you look at it as one, then it's possible to do as this figure shows, have a cross communication about it. You see the point? And when let's put it this way, since there are also people here working with children and adults or youth, it's very different what a teenager perceive as secure a Friday night in Copenhagen than what does the child's parents perceive as secure and what the police perceive as secure. And this is based on not the term secure, but it's referred to what people think so as safe. And if we don't distinguish it from each other, we will cross-communicate with each other. And that brings us into a very difficult position. Okay. A lady said that I have been lucky because I have had the opportunity to have freedom and safety at the same time. And that is because if we look at it as separately dimension, putting into a cross like this, then we will see that freedom and safety turns out into care. Well, you can also be safe under strict control, but that is what we then call overprotection. So you can have safety, but then you have to choose whether you would have care or overprotection. And you can also have danger, and then you will end up with laissez-faire or what other will call neglect, depending on why this happens. So this could be useful. We have written a book about self-determination, and half of the book is written by people with intellectual disabilities. And the book opens with a poem, Human Dignity, by Hanne Mathiasen, and it ends with a poem, Star Heaven, by Geir Brekke. The main theme is that self-determination implies that people are interconnected, share the same human rights and human dignity, and are equipped with the same reason and consciousness. There is a poem. I'm not going to read it because I see I have a little time now. So I just want to focus on what some other contributions. A woman with Down syndrome called Marte Goksør says, and she had a main role in one of the national theaters in Oslo, and she wanted to become a professional actor, and she was denied even to come to the rehearsal. And she says that, all I want is that you believe in me. I want you to believe that I can. And she challenged all the doubters, the know-it-alls, by saying this. She challenged us to realize that what we understand by good judgments and reason subjects her to injustice. So we are actually hindering her. Kjell, a fictional name of a man who lived in a central institution, asked for a confirmation or that regardless of what he tells from his experiences, he will not be denied free exit. So that tells us also what it does to a person to live a life into institution, not having anything to say, and when you then are being asked to tell from it, you can't even free you from some of your experiences. So with that in mind, we don't really know what is good for the other person, because we can't even recognize some of the feelings that people have. He challenged us in our role as service providers to be responsible for our own and other people's actions, and not to defend ourselves, claiming we wasn't there. So some of us will be so occupied by finding out why this happened, instead of seeing that perhaps we are part in the same process still. From this book, especially from all these text, poems, narratives, and contributions from people with intellectual disabilities, there are two things that strikes me. The first is the silent and modest form in which the demands are presented, and the other is the trust in other people, even if they have had experiences of the opposite. Compared with other battles and movements, they are often marked by the opposite: loud protests and a strong distrust of other people's intention. So this is something we have to take into account when we ask ourselves, why are people with intellectual disability not moving forward? Why don't they demand the right to self-determination in ways that we can understand? Well, they say it in their own words, and we have to work it out from that point of view.
Well, I predict that the main and most effective threat to progress will come from the service system, the state bodies, and the provider agencies which supposedly exist, as has already been pointed out this morning. They supposedly exist to serve the interests of citizens with disabilities. In case you're wondering, don't make this entirely clear, I speak as somebody who has been linked to that service system and has often felt ashamed to be associated with it. Progress may be halted by people inside that service system who say that they support self-determination. Some of them will sincerely believe that they support it, and yet their actions will serve to neutralize the revolutionary potential of these ideas. How will they do this? Well, first of all, they will suffocate the demand, your demand, for self-determination with words that are unnecessary. There will be doctoral theses on self-determination, scholarly textbooks on self-determination, training programs which enable agency staff to acquire certificates in self-determination. And thus the professionals will make themselves more expert on self-determination than the people who originally demanded it. And it will only be a small step further to make self-determination a technology, something so complex that it has to be done by experts. People with disabilities won't be allowed or enabled to achieve self-determination. They'll have it delivered to them alongside their residential and day service program. Experts will develop ways of measuring whether people achieve self-determination and other ways of deciding whether they should be allowed to have it. There will be self-determination development centres where people will go to learn self-determination skills, and they'll be sent there whether they want to go or not. You can call me a cynic if you like. But this is the way the system deals with threats, in my experience. And if we want this to stop this happening to self-determination and IF, then we need to defend these ideas to make sure they stay in the ownership of citizens who have disabilities and that they don't get adapted to suit the interests of other people. And this is why that we hope one of the outcomes of this conference will be a declaration that nails down the real meaning of self-determination and individualised funding. A declaration which will live on after this conference. In effect, will work like 1,200 people looking over the shoulders of the professionals and the bureaucrats and the politicians and saying, don't mess with our ideas.
Well, that was the warning sign. And I think also it's interesting that from the conference in 2000 there was a declaration. And I think that it's important that countries and professionals and people with intellectual disability work together trying to figure out some of these declarations in their own settings. Well, I'm going to end this with the poem by Geir Brekke. Yesterday it was sunshine in Copenhagen. Today it will be sunshine, I hope. At least I would create some sunshine in this room by reading the poem. Star heaven, dark night, clear heaven, tropical night, 30 degrees, romantic journey, beautiful girl, my game, sweets and a kiss from a girl, a family, a dream. By Geir Brekke. Okay, so I end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for telling us something about the terms for people with intellectual disabilities and the challenges for social educators. As you said, it's important to focus on the importance of self-determination behavior because we have some responsibility in creating the terms for it. We were told also by Steve Dawson at the end of the speech. And also the data from '94 showed there is possibilities for development. I hope it's better today, but still possibility for development. So let's focus on the words of the man, his name was Chester Finn, when he said, and we have an obligation giving the possibility that people with intellectual disabilities can have the opportunity of be that change. Thank you, Karl. And let's give Karl a hand.